Right now, so far we have finished with our first date picker, so that one is done. All right, so what I'm going to do right now, because the code's there, it works, etc., I'm going to remove the assistant editor, and it's time to get to the single component, which is right here. So as always, the first thing I'll do is remove the label. Whoops. So highlight it, hit delete, now it's gone. Our next picker lets the user select from a list of values. We're going to use an array to hold the values we want to display in the picker. Pickers don't hold any data themselves. Instead, they call methods on their data source and delegate to get the data they need to display. The picker doesn't care where the underlying data lives. It asks for the data when it needs it, and the data source and delegate, which in this case, as often is the case, will be in the same object, work together to supply the data. As a result, the data could be coming from a list, as we do in this section. Okay? Could be from a URL, could be from a database, or someplace else. For the picker class to ask the controller for its data, we must ensure that the controller implements the right methods. One part of doing this is declaring in the controller's class definition that it will implement a couple of protocols. It says we are supposed to click on the single component here. This controller class acts as both the data source and the delegate. So we've got class single component date picker view controller. All right, and it inherits from UI view controller, but now we need to add our delegates and data source. So we'll have UI picker view delegate and UI picker view data source. I'm trying to figure out why I'm getting that error right there. Single component picker view controller colon UI view controller comma UI picker view delegate comma UI picker view data source. That all looks correct. It says this type does not conform to protocol UI picker view data source. Don't know why it wouldn't. I can't imagine that it needs that on the line by itself. I don't know why that would change anything, and I didn't think it would. Well, hopefully this will fix itself up once we get going. We'll find out. Now select the main storyboard again. This is our single right here. In the document outline, click the single icon to bring the view controller into the foreground, which I've done. Next, bring over a picker view from the library and add it to the view, placing it snugly into the top of the view just as you did with the date picker view. Well, I didn't do that, but I'm going to now. All right, that gets us to page 222. The picker needs to be horizontally centered and pinned to the top of the scene. You can do this by using the same auto layout constraints that you use for the date picker. So in other words, we want to click here. We want to go down to the bottom, go to Align, and choose Horizontal, Center, and Container. All right, and add our constraint. All right, then we'll click here and we'll go to the pin. This should be set to 0. It is. We'll change this from update frames to items of new constraints and add our constraint. Hopefully that's everything we had to do. Now let's connect this picker to its controller. The procedure here is just like for the previous picker. Open the Assistant Editor. Control drag from the picker to the top of the single view controller class and create an outlet named single picker. Well, now we know how to do this. So next, with the picker selected, bring up the Connections Inspector. If you look at the connections available for the picker view, you'll see that the first two items are data source and delegate. If you don't see these, make sure that you have the picker selected. There's data source and there's delegate. Drag from the circle next to data source to the view controller icon at the top of the scene. Then do the same thing from the delegate. So, click here, control drag over to here, let go. Go to delegate, control drag over to here and let go. Okay? Now this picker knows that the instance of the single component picker view controller class in the storyboard is its data source and delegate, and the picker will ask to supply the data to be displayed. In other words, when the picker needs information about the data it's going to display, it asks the single component picker view controller instance that controls this view for that information. All right. As we did before, and I'm going to move this over a tad there, they want us to put a button down here. Very similar to the way we just did it there. Give it the title again, Select. In the connections inspector, drag from the circle next to touch up inside the code in the connections inspector. All right, drag from the touch up inside releasing it just above the closing bracket at the end of the class definition to make a new action method. Name the action button pressed. I'm again going to set this up for UI button. Click connect. We've got that. As always, when we add a view to a storyboard, we need to set its auto layout constraints. In the case of the button, these constraints need to center horizontally and make sure that the distance below the picker remains fixed. All right. It says you saw how to do this when we added a similar button, so just do it to the same constraints the same way here. Now that you finished building the GUI for the second tab, save the storyboard and let's go do some coding. All right, so I've got a little bit of code that I've got to write on the next couple pages. But first, I have to go and set the auto layout constraints for the button. And of course, I don't remember how to do that. All right. Click on the button to select it. Click the Align button. Choose Horizontal Center in Container. And click the Add One Constraint. Then Control drag from the button to the picker. Choose vertical spacing. Finally, when it comes in, go down to here and choose Update Frames, and that should fix everything. Okay, so we've got that done. All right, I'm on page 223. So making some progress here. As the author says halfway down on the page, to make our controller work properly, we'll start with some code you should feel comfortable with and add a few new methods we have not yet seen before. Single click, single component picker view controller .swift, and add the following property at the top. Right here. Then add the following code to the button press that you see down here. This makes up the rest of page 223. All right. So let me bring the code up. Let me expand this. In fact, let me remove a few things here. Just trying to give myself a little bit of room. Still not sure why I'm getting that error message. And I got a feeling that won't be a good thing. So, at the top we are told here, private let character names. I'm going to change this a little. I don't like the way he does this, so I'm going to call it family names. And I'm going to put in the members of my family, including myself. And the last one is my dog. All right. Then add the following code to the button pressed method. So I'm just adding the rest of the code that's on page 223 in your book. Oops, it's got to be family. Let's keep it character names because that's all the code that they have in the book here. So. Selected row. Selected. Much of it is the same kind of code that we put in before. The button press method is almost identical to the one we use for the date picker, but unlike the date picker, a regular picker can't tell us what data it holds because it doesn't maintain the data. It hands that job off to the delegate and the data source. So the button press method needs a way to ask the picker which row is selected and then grabs the corresponding data from the picker data array. And that's done with the let row line that you see right here, which is line 22. In the class declaration, we created an array of character names so that we have data to feed the picker. Usually your data will come from other sources. I mean, it could come from a lot of different things, database query or whatever. By embedding an array of names in the code, as we've done here, we're making it harder on ourselves if we need to update the list, which makes sense. Finally, they say insert the following new code at the end of the file. This is wrong. Okay, I goofed up here, so I'm going to try to fix it. Now I think I fixed it. All right. Let's see if that also removed the errors that we had at the top of the program, because we were alluding to stuff we hadn't written yet. So we had errors in here and they're gone now. All right. So should have figured that out myself earlier. I know I have read this before, but I didn't. Okay. So the author says these three methods are required to implement the picker. The first two methods, which are number of components in picker view and picker view, are from the UI picker view data source protocol. They're both required. The first one, the number of components in picker view, pickers can have more than one spinning wheel or component. This is how the picker asks how many components it should display. We only want to display one list this time, so we return a value of 1. Note that the UI picker view is passed in as a parameter. This parameter points to the picker view that is asking us the question, which makes it possible to have multiple pickers being controlled by the same data source. We're not going to worry about that now. We'll look at that in the next one. The second one that you see right here is used by the picker to ask how many rows of data there are for any given component. Again, we are told which picker is asking and which component that picker is asking about. Since we know we have only one picker and one component, it says we don't bother with either of the arguments and simply return a count of how many we have. Now the author does mention down towards the bottom here, and you may or may not want to look at this, but so I'm on the bottom of page 225. This mark what section that you see right here. It says, did you notice the following lines from the single component picker view controller.swift file? Any line of code that begins with a double slash is a comment. I believe you know that. Comments that start with / mark are treated specially by Xcode. They tell it to put an entry in the pop-up menu of methods and properties at the top of the editor pane. The first one with a dash, all right, the mark : dash, puts a break in the menu. The second one creates a text entry whenever the rest of the line holds, containing whatever the rest of the line holds, which can be used as a short descriptive header. So the header would be picker data source methods. Some classes, especially controller classes, are likely to get rather long, and the methods and functions can be harder to get along. Putting in mark comments and logically organizing your code makes it easier to use, which hopefully at least makes sense. After the two data source methods, we implement one delegate method. Unlike the data source methods, all delegate methods are optional, which is, as they mentioned on the top of page 226, a little bit deceiving to say, because you do need to implement at least one delegate method. You'll usually implement the method that we're implementing here, which is the picker view. However, if you want to display something other than text in the picker, you must implement a different method instead. We'll get to that later when we talk about the custom picker later on in the chapter. So in this method, as you can see here on page 226, the picker asks us to provide the data for a specific row in a specific component. All right. So we're done here. It says go ahead and run the program again. When it comes up, switch to the second tab, the one named single or the one with the 1 on it. Check out the new custom picker. All right, so I'm going to stop this, come back into here. Excellent time as always to come in and do a file, save. Let's run the program again and see if we're done with the next component, our second of 5. We've got the date one down. Now we're looking at this, at finishing up the single one. Again, mine will look a little different because I put the members of my family in there, as opposed to putting in the names of the Star Wars characters as they did in the book. All right. Next, we'll go in and we'll implement the multi-component picker, the one that's going to have the different kinds of sandwiches on it. I'd like to at least get done with that one, that part, and then go on and do the dependent and the custom a little later as I have time. Why that's taking so long is way, way, way beyond me. Let that try one more time. Again, maybe I'm just talking to myself here, but I really do enjoy this book, and I think there's some really, really excellent material in it. All right, so that still works. Okay, that looks good. But we put something in here that made it blow up. That's never good. So I will go back, stop the run here. Let's go back and take a look at the code. I'm going to quickly take a look at my code and then hopefully be done with this particular one that I'm working on right now. So, what could be the problem? All sorts of things. This shouldn't matter that I've got that on the same line. I wouldn't think that would matter at all, but you never know. That all looks okay. We put nothing in view did load, so let's go down to the bottom of the program. can open up a little bit of space on some of these. So. It's not an int. Whoops. This should be a string. This one is not return 1. This one is returned character names row. Know what I was reading. All right, so let's save and try it again. Again, that one's working okay. There's the names. Let's select my oldest daughter. Well, it doesn't like something with my alert view. Showing all of them, Jeff, Sandy, Taylor, Mackenzie, Chloe, Lacey, they're all in there. But when I click select, nothing is happening, which isn't cool. So let's go back and look at that. And then we're going to put this next part here to rest. It's my own fault for trying to type as fast as I do. Everything I can tell that's in there looks like it's correct. I did not miss any code. They say this, but that's just going to put an exclamation point on it. I don't see anything that looks incorrect that's right here. And I do know that if I come back up and I bring up my storyboard, okay, and I've got the, okay, I want to make sure these are wired correctly. Picker view, which is what it should be. And the button. That all looks correct as far as I can tell. I'm going to do one more save, try to run it one more time, and I'm going to stop for right now after I run this and double check one more time, but see if I can figure it out and then come back, and if I figure out anything I've made a mistake on, I'll let you know. Yeah, that's all working. Doggone it, the button's there. It must, I would think it's wired up correctly. I'll double check that. So I'm going to stop right now, and I will come back at you with the next part and hopefully the fix for this in just a couple minutes.